Hi, this is Glenn Ingle with CrewTimer Regatta Timing. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to set up video review using NDI cameras and the two applications that CrewTimer supports, CrewTimer Video Recorder and CrewTimer Video Review. The diagram you see here shows the essential components for a recording system. In the upper left is a streaming video camera powered with power over Ethernet. Most of these cameras can also be powered with a plug-in direct to an AC outlet if necessary. I prefer a Cat5 cable as that allows a lot more flexibility in placement of the camera. The PoE switch in the center powers the camera over the Cat5 cable. It also provides a connection between a laptop, which is doing the recording and review functions, and the camera. And finally, there's a required connection to the internet. That connection can be either wired directly to your facility, or it can hook into an LTE internet router that has a wired connection. The internet connection is used for two things. First is the ability to time synchronize the camera to time standards available on the internet. And second is to allow access to CrewTimer Cloud to download configurations for your regatta and report timestamps. The NDI cameras, NDI stands for Network Device Interface, have built-in network time protocol support, allowing it to go out to the internet, communicate with time servers, and set its internal clock very precisely. Once that synchronization is done, the NDI cameras will timestamp every single frame received and send them to the computer when properly configured. Let's get started by opening up the recording app from CrewTimer. When the application first starts, you'll see a screen similar to what is shown here. This top section shows cameras that have been discovered on the network. If I click the drop down here, you'll see that it's found two cameras. One is my NDI camera, and the other is my MacBook Pro running an OBS application, which also provides an NDI stream. In this case, I'm mostly interested in the NDI camera, of course, so I'm going to select that. You'll also notice that it shows the IP address of the camera, 10.0.1.188. This IP address is obtained from the local internet connection. A recording folder can be selected where the recordings will be placed. I recommend creating a folder for each day of the regatta with a unique name. In this case, I'm just going to leave it in my Documents folder for this demo. You can also specify a file prefix for your recording, perhaps abbreviation for your regatta or your club. And you can specify what's called a recording slice. When recording happens, MP4 files are created on the hard drive at a specific rate. In this case, I've specified every 300 seconds a new MP4 file will be created. Over the course of your regatta, you'll end up with dozens of MP4 files that cover the whole day. One thing to note is that the video review application has a connection to the recorder application, allowing it to initiate a new slice. So you don't have to wait a full 5 minutes to start reviewing video. I can start my recording quickly simply by pressing the play button here. When I do that, you'll see in the upper right, it shows the current file name that it's recording. It also shows the frame rate that is discovered. In this case, it's 1920 by 1080 at 60 frames per second. For best results, I found that 1280 by 720 works best. 1920 by 1080, although supported, may be too much processing power for some computers. So let's go and see how that has changed on the camera. I'm going to stop recording. And I'm going to note the IP address here, 10.0.1.188. So I'm now going to open up a web browser and visit that address. The address was 10.0.1.188, so I'll put that in. The default password and username is admin on Ada cameras. And once I get logged in, you'll notice here that I can change the zoom. I can zoom out. I can zoom in. I can manually put the focus in and out. Generally, I like to set these up manually and then leave them be. When autofocus is used, sometimes elements in the scene can cause the focus to change when you don't want it to. So the main setting that we wanted to look at here was the video frame rate, and that's found under the Settings tab. If I come here and look at video encode settings, I have a mainstream, which is what we'll be recording from, and its resolution is currently 1920 by 1080. So I'm going to change that to be 1280 by 720. So this is 720p. Confirm. And now I've saved that rate. Now when I do a recording, I'll get my desired 1280 by 720p. Also on the settings panel is the NDI stream settings. Default values are usually just fine for this. You may want to change the name of your camera so when it's discovered it shows up with a different name. The IP Ethernet settings should be able to be defaulted. Dynamic host configuration protocol will automatically retrieve an IP address from the network. And general settings is where the time synchronization is configured. Here we can see that NTP is enabled, and that's the network time protocol. And it synchronizes with time.nist.gov, which is a US government time server that provides precision time. The time zone can be set or not because the recording records in UTC 0 Greenwich time, so it essentially ignores the time zone for recordings. Some of these other settings that you may be interested in particular the exposure setting. I like to set this to manual and increase the f-stop iris as much as possible. So I'm going to select 14 here. And here you can see I've still got a reasonable amount of light in the picture at f14. By increasing the aperture, it gives me a wider field of view. I also like to have the shutter speed somewhat more than 100. 100 is okay, but let's go maybe 500th of a second, which darkens the scene a little bit. If you're outside for regatta, this may be sufficient, as you won't be focusing on these window elements. But you can also add a bit of digital gain here for the lighting to brighten things back up if necessary. So the key setting here again is to increase your aperture setting as high as you can get by with to have a wider field of view for focus. Again, the focus I like to set to manual and use the plus and minus buttons here to set it to something that's reasonable for the regatta. White balance I've never had to use, but there's a one-push adjustment if your colors don't look right. Image effects I don't use. Image settings. You might get some benefit from adding sharpness. You can experiment with that. Video settings. This is for the digital output on the camera, which I think is the HDMI port. It's currently set to 1920 by 1080. We don't really care what that rate is, so I'll just leave it. Audio, again, we don't use audio, so pretty much you don't need to worry about any of the settings here. You can turn them off if you want. So that's a brief overview of the web interface. Now let's go back to our recording program and see if we're getting our 720p. Okay, I'm going to click the start button here. And here's our picture. And up here on the upper right, we're seeing 1280 by 720 at 60 frames per second, 720p. Now you'll notice here the finish line is not in the center. That's because I ran this program earlier and I was experimenting with changing the finish line. When you change the finish line in the review application, it communicates that to the recorder application. Normally you'd want that to be in the center of the screen. When we start the recording up, the review application, I'll show you how to set that